Hello and welcome to This Week in the Middle East with myself, Francis Matthew, and Eddie O'Sullivan. It's a dramatic week because finally we got the Iranian response to the Israeli bombing of the consulate in Damascus. So let's go and look at the headlines, which are important.
In This Week in the Middle East, Iran carried out drone and missile attacks on Israel on the night of the 14th of April in retaliation for the attack on its consulate in Damascus 2 weeks ago. Oil prices are heading towards $100 a barrel as Middle East tensions increase. Iraq's Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani has flown to Washington for talks with President Biden on Monday. The first laden LNG tanker to enter the Red Sea for 3 months sailed into the Gulf of Suez from the north. And Saudi Arabia has scaled back a desert city called The Line, which had been originally planned to stretch 105 miles and eventually be home to about 9 million people.
So there we have it. The drone attacks, drone and cruise missiles, 200 have been aimed at Israel. Eddie? Hello.
Hello, Francis.
It was quite a few days.
Well, quite a night, Francis. You and I have spent a lot of time living and working in the Middle East region. We have gone out at night in different circumstances. Sometimes our hearts full of joy and hope. Other occasions, we've had some pretty bleak moments. I thought last night really ranks as one of the worst, because it was captured, I thought, by this photograph that was posted, the Dome of the Rock, the sacred Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount at night. And you can see the Dome of the Rock, which is gold, lit up, looks lovely. What a place to visit. And then behind it, the sky is full of drones and missiles coming over. This is Jerusalem, for goodness sake. And we have become accustomed, I think, all of us, and you and I, more than most, I suspect, to expect nothing but the worst, and in a way, just to look the other way when terrible things, momentous things happen. We lived through a 9/11. We saw what happened there. We saw the invasion of Baghdad. But last night, I mean, there are moments, and I would really call on people just to think about what's happening here. This should not be happening. And if we had more people reflecting on this rather than looking at it as a sort of video game entertainment in between, cups of tea, there may be a more restraint on the people who govern us to stop these things repeating.
But as we watched those astonishing films of all those flares in the sky as the drones and missiles were stopped, they were coming through. Let's also remember some of the numbers. There was 200 drones and missiles, nearly all of which were stopped. So what could have been absolutely devastating on Israel turned out to be much less so, with I think 1 or 2 Israelis wounded and some light damage to a military facility. So it raises my question whether this is, was it all just for show? Was it a demonstration by the Iranians that they could do it? Iran afterwards said to the UN it considered that this matter is concluded. And even before that, the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abdullahian, said through the Omanis that any future reaction, which has now happened, was, I quote, designed to avoid major escalation. So, yes, I agree with you. Last night was shocking to see, but in the morning, we wake up to Israel, which hasn't suffered much damage thanks to its defense and to the Americans and others who stopped the missiles and drones as they passed through Iraq and Syria, where they have air forces and where air force is up and attacking them.
Yeah, it all depends which way you look at it. From the Western Israeli point of view, it's a demonstration of the real effectiveness of Israel and the West's air defense process, because it wasn't just Israel. The Jordanians had cooperated the British and the Americans and the French.
Yes.
So the Israeli spokesman today has said it's a magnificent expression of the alliance of the decent nations. That's what he called it, alliance of decent nations, to stop any of the bombs coming in and killing civilians. So that's one way of looking at it. But on the other hand, I was listening to an Iranian academic on the BBC who was saying, no, quite the opposite. This is a clear demonstration of the capacity of the Islamic Republic to do things in a surprising, startling way. But we weren't aiming. The Iranians were not aiming to do any damage. They were not aiming to kill anybody. They had given days of notice. They said we're going to do it. It was just the scale of it which was startling. I mean, Jeremy Bowen on the BBC said he didn't think it was going to be quite as spectacular as this. And then there's another perspective, which is sort of the military strategists who are saying that what the Iranians have done, it's allowed them to identify more of the Israeli air protection system and how it all works. And then another group of people are saying, they say this is a strategic defeat for Iran because they're just alienating people, and now it's Israel is going to be the victim. So you can pick and choose, Francis, which line you want to take.
Well, there's another line in addition to those choices. There's another one, which is that Netanyahu is beginning to run out of steam in Gaza. He's withdrawn a large number of troops, 9 brigades down to 1. And just as his policy of starving Gaza was beginning to irritate the Americans so much that they even abstained on that vote in the UN, and were beginning to get their support for Israel was beginning to become wobbly, just at that moment, Netanyahu decides to drop the missile on the Iranians in Damascus, killing 7 senior officers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, and triggers this reaction, and now has an ironclad guarantee from Biden.
Yeah, right through this crisis, and right from the beginning, before we even started talking about it, Francis, there was all this Netanyahu has got to go, and he's losing support. This has been said. How long has it been said for? It's been said for years he's going to go to prison, has managed to avoid it. There he is. He's 74 or 75, and he's prime minister. And it's the forlorn hope of people, in my view, run out of any original thought at all, or ability to form any view at all. That it's not about Netanyahu. This is what the key thing is. It's not about Netanyahu. And people think it's all about Netanyahu. If he wasn't there, things would be all different. I don't believe that's a word. There's 2 factors at work here. One is the very strong support that all the opinion polls show that the Israeli inaction in Gaza is gone. They're still talking about the overwhelming majority of Israelis who believe that the assault on Gaza should continue, including Rafah. And that's why we had this row in the cabinet with some of the hard right saying we're going to pull out of the cabinet if you don't hit Rafah. That's one. And the one that we come back to week after week after week after week, which has got nothing to do with Netanyahu, nothing, is to do with American politics and the dysfunction in Washington and the inability of the world's most powerful country and the world's most powerful man to exercise any meaningful influence on a country of 10 million people, which is supposed to be his closest friend. And we're still in this dynamic. And I mean, I'm repeating myself, Francis. We're going to go on and on. So last night, I think why I think last night matters, and it's going to get lost in time. And in the end, people say, when did that happen? They won't remember. But I think as an image, when you look at it and just keep your mind open,
yes,
and say, this is the Dome of the Rock. I mean, it's been there forever. Jerusalem, the city of peace, of goods. And this is happening. I mean, how much more are the people of the world going to be ready to put up with from the way our governments, wherever they are taking us? This is not what we want to see, is it, Francis? We do not want to see that happening over Al-Quds.
Jerusalem has been destroyed so many times in its history. It is a symbol of peace, which has been destroyed repeatedly. And by back to Sennacherib and the Assyrians, by others, including the Romans, and so on and on. So
yeah,
yes,
that doesn't comfort me, Francis. That last night wasn't as bad as Sennacherib.
It's still standing. It's not as bad as the Romans in AD 70. But in short, I think. No, it's not about. I agree with you. It's not about Netanyahu as should he go, not go. In this case, I'm talking about Netanyahu, the master manipulator. Way back in the 90s, when we were talking, I was following his first premiership. He would put some road somewhere. Oh, drama, drama, drama. And meanwhile, with the other hand, he was building 300 settlements. Houses. So when the road was finally given away, no one noticed the 300. So he's very good at talking with the left and then doing on the right. Right? He hides and moves.
Only because Washington lets him do it. Only because Washington lets him do it. That's it for us. He's not. I mean, he's the most blatant kind of second-hand car salesman. I mean, there's nothing subtle about it. He'll say more or less anything, to close the deal. I mean, he's a pre-Trump Trump. And he's a profoundly dishonest person. The only reason he's allowed to do this is because America lets him do it. It's because Congress lets him do it. And it's because American voters let him do it. That's it. And once that stops, once the American voters and Congress and president stop it, Netanyahu will be consigned to the rubbish bin of history. He won't have anything on against his neighbors.
And I think, despite what you're saying about the Israelis rallying around their government at time of war, when an election is held, he is likely to be consigned to the history.
Well, that could be another 3 years, Francis. I mean, the man.
It could be. Yeah. No. And as I say, my only point about Netanyahu at this particular moment is that he's a master manipulator. Rather. Let's take a look at the GCC. The GCC has come out with its first ever planning document on regional security. And in typical modern GCC fashion, they emphasize the benefits of diplomacy. They say that that's the way to solve all our problems. I think it leaves quite a few holes in the reality, which is that they need their military allies. They are still a lightly populated group of countries with very large oil reserves and therefore very attractive to anybody who wants to invade them, as Saddam tried. But they have done quite a lot of good in terms of developing diplomacy. You can talk of how they had a quarrel with Qatar, then they disputed, they ended it. There's the Saudis talking with the Iranians. The UAE is on the ground in Gaza. Qatar is in touch with Hamas and the Taliban and in its own way negotiating. And Oman is there intermediating with the Iranians, as they have done repeatedly over time. So it's in a funny situation where you've got this group of loosely connected oil-rich nations who are working their way into a kind of diplomatic lead position in the Middle East, and now finally say that's their main point in terms of regional security.
Yeah, the GCC was founded, you and I, Francis, are old enough to remember the moment, in 1981. And it's got a big headquarters in Riyadh. You go to Riyadh, and it's a whacking great big marbly headquarters with the bureaucracy and everything else. So the question's got to be asked. Now we're talking about 43 years of existence next month.
Yep.
Exactly what has the GCC actually delivered? Now, there were hopes 20 years ago, Francis, and you and I will remember it. It was after the Iraq War when, freedom, democracy was being brought to the Middle East by America and Britain. For the first time, and they seemed to think that things are dislodging and things were going to move into a certain direction. And there was definitely a belief, a hope that the GCC would become a sort of Arabian form of European Union. It's catnip to you, Francis. European Union, an association of countries all together. And there was talk, and we were at the time, we reported on it, of, not only of a complete customs union and free movement of trade and people, less like the European Union, and a common external tariff, just like the European Union, but there was going to be a common currency. Do you remember that one, Francis?
Yes.
You were even arguing about what it was going to be called. Was it going to be a dinar or a dirham?
Yes.
And then the thing sort of went wrong when there was a dispute, which I never thought was really based on anything real, about where the central bank was going to be based. who's going to be the European Central Bank of the Gulf? Was it going to be in Riyadh, or was it going to be in the UAE or Dubai?
Correct.
That's where that idea went out the window.
But
But since
if
then,
I can
GCC is
jump, let me jump, because there you've got that encapsulates the profound split in the GCC between the. I mean, the geography was not the important one. The important one was the UAE with its much more open market approach. At the time, its customs thing was, I think, 2 or 3%, and the Saudis were more protectionist, 10%. So you had this big split between the sort of more protectionist, inward-looking territories and the more open. So it wasn't the geography; it was the vision of how they might manage such a currency.
Well, I think, I'll go further than that. Actually, it wasn't technical; it was profoundly profound, which is in Arabia, societies which are based on family and tribe and tradition and history. How could they really coalesce into a single nation? I mean, Saudi Arabia did that. I mean, Saudi Arabia in the first quarter of the 20th century was created. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was created out of huge area which had dozens and dozens of different tribal groupings, including heterodox religious movements, including Shiites and Ismailis, and that was achieved.
You say coalesce. Actually, they were conquered by fire and sword.
Correct. It was done by force and then by marriage, usual stuff.
Yes.
His family married into them, but it's still held together. Very top down. Saudi Arabia.
Correct.
Stuff is anything other, with the ruling family right on top of it. So it's not a nice, happy European Union. This sort of, let's go to Paris tomorrow. No, what are you going to have for lunch in Berlin? It's been Saudi Arabia's been brought around by a solid force. And I think in the end, the idea of this European Union for Arabia, although I love the idea, I thought, I thought this is the way that the Gulf states could really have a massive influence on the whole region. They could act on the Middle East economy in the way that Germany acted upon the European economy post-war, and everyone would be vectored in the same happy direction. But it was always wishful thinking, too much personal and personal rivalry, too conflicting differences. Well, you and I know, Francis, don't we, that we've dealt with the region for a long period of time, and sometimes there are disputes at the highest level in these countries which don't make any sense whatsoever to us, do they? Why is Sheikh falling out with Sheikh Y with Sheikh Z? You don't know what it is, but it really matters if you're in that grouping. And there's a lot of interpersonal, historic rivalries. I was struck. Can I just say one thing? Can I just say one thing and then I'll shut up? I remember when there was the neutral zone. I don't know if you studied this subject, which is this territory, but which
the neutral zone near Kuwait,
and Saudi Arabia, which was created by a stroke of a pen by a British diplomat in 1921 or 2, when Britain was going around sort of sorting out Johnny Arab and saying, "Hey, this is where you're going to go," and doing the borders like they did in India. And the land was basically, this neutral zone was created out of what Kuwait thought was its own territory. The Kuwaitis thought, this is our land you're taking away from us, including tribal people as well, and giving it to the Saudi Arabians. And it was quite striking that about 12 years ago, when there was Saudi Arabia, when the oil production in the neutral zone was stopped because of a disagreement between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, it was worth pointing out that the grandfather of the father of the Saudi Arabian king at that time, that King Salman, his father was actually the person who had an argument, 100 years ago with his counterpart in Kuwait. And I'm sure when they were growing up, in Riyadh, in Kuwait, the story would be told, in the family about the perfidy of those guys down the road. And a lot of these things are not understood. And I think a lot of people in the West say, oh, why can't Arabians do the logical thing like we do in Britain? The sensible thing. We're always doing the sensible thing. Why can't they be more sensible just like us? And they don't take into account how powerful an influence of family ties and relation and memory, how much it influences Arabian politics.
Well, I think those sort of family histories and social memory apply to anywhere, wherever you are, whether you're European, whether you're Asian, or whether you're Arab. That's all part of it. I think the GCC, the fundamental issue is that you've got a very large Saudi Arabia which is overwhelmingly superior in terms of geography, in terms of population and oil. And so and you've got 5 others. Actually, sorry, you've probably got 4 others who are relatively small and on the fringe of Saudi Arabia, and they remember very well they are the bits that the Saudis did not catch when they were busy expanding their territory. And you've got the Omanis, who are a bit off on their own territory beyond the empty quarter in their mountains. And so you've got these 6 countries who share an awful lot in the sense that they are traditional, that they are oil wealthy and quite small populations, but they are also quite different. So I wouldn't say that the plan for the Gulf Cooperation Union, which the Saudis put forward and was firmly rejected, is a likely runner. I regard it more as a sort of club of like-minded nations. And they do manage to cooperate to a much greater degree than otherwise.
Oh, no, I agree with you there, Francis. I think it's been a success. The GCC has been a success because its ambitions have been so limited.
But I think, to compare it to the European Union, which has also had its issues, where you've also got the elephant in the room of Germany, and the others are working out how to contain it, is very similar in that sense. But to compare the two, I wouldn't like to take the comparison too far.
No, I'm just saying that at the time, I mean, this is 20 years ago, the European Union, the guilt was still on the gingerbread without the European Union. And the idea that European Union was the future, this was the future for the world, that these associations of regional countries, that's where the future would be. I think that has gone. That has gone as well. So,
and I think a better comparison might be with the Arab League, which has stumbled into confusion and almost irrelevance once Nasser and sort of pan-Arabism failed.
Yeah, I mean, don't marry the Arab League, very ineffective organization, divided from the beginning, and it was actually set up by Britain, wasn't it? We set it up.
Yeah. But at the time, when Gamal Abdel Nasser was there, it had a position. Let's look at a final thought. As we talk around the issues of Gaza and Yemen and the Houthi and the Red Sea, we are in danger of forgetting that these impacts have a huge pressure on the oil market, that the oil market is going all over the place. So I'd like to take your view, because you're more on that territory, on I think the oil market hit a 6-month high.
Yeah, that's right. Oil is such a political commodity, and because everyone uses it all over the world, every country in the world, every society, every class uses oil and gas. In a way, it captures, it summarizes in a way the state of the world, you can say. A globally traded commodity that everyone uses and we all need. And so when the oil price goes up, it tells you something, and when it goes down, it tells you something. And I think what's happened to the oil price, and we can see the trend, that it definitely reflects tensions. So after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the oil price went up because people thought the sanctions would lead to a reduction in oil supply and everything else.
Correct.
And then when the attacks started to get serious in the Red Sea, but now we can see since January the oil price has gone up by a quarter. And now in my day, when the first 20 years or so when I was following the oil market, a 5% increase in the oil price or 10% would be considered to be absolutely radical. Now we're talking about 25% since January, and that's definitely connected to Middle East tensions. But what was quite telling, I thought, is that the oil price on Friday, when Iran had been clearly stating we're going to attack Israel, we're going to attack Israel, and people were saying, oh, they're going to attack the Strait of Hormuz and they're going to block everything, that the oil price definitely went up, but it still stayed below 100. But I think there's evidence and I think it's always worth watching the oil price, Francis. That's what I would say, because it summarizes the distilled wisdom of a lot of people who are paying close attention to what's happening. But I think the underlying trend is that we may go up this summer to $100 a barrel again. Because these tensions that we talked about at the start of the show,
Yes.
It's clearly not over. It's clearly not over. This is the overture to the first act in a 3-part series. And I think inexorably the oil price is going to go up.
But
And
don't you think that the up in the last sort of week or two was in expectation of the Iranian action, which has now happened,
yes,
the less drama than expected.
yes.
So it would be right now, I suspect there's more of a deflationary moment.
No, there's going to be profit taking on this. What's
Yeah.
called profit taking, that people who bought, who sold forward at a higher price, they're going to dump there. And so I think tomorrow, which is Monday the 15th, you'll probably see the oil price coming down. But if you look at the trend, basically, I mean, since the start of the year, certainly, when the whole thing didn't, when the whole Gaza thing didn't come to an end before Christmas, which we were all hoping would happen.
No.
Whereas with the oil market and everybody in there is now ratcheting up, they're absorbing a much higher level of risk and all kinds of possibilities. So when you actually get people seriously posting, how would it, there's no way that Iran could interrupt flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Someone's stating that. That is obviously targeting some increased anxiety. So, but I think it must go up, Francis. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I think the oil price is going up. It's always worth watching it and to see what's.
I take the point, but I begin to doubt whether Iran wants to take any such actions. If we're talking about Iran, I mean, yes, we and I were watching the tanker war in the 80s. Yes, we've talked about Hormuz blockading, but I think it would be surprising if Iran moved on to do that.
I agree with you. I mean, and that is the conclusion. That's one of the reasons why the oil price didn't go up to $200 a barrel.
Yes.
Is because the analysts, who have to make the sensible decisions, saying it is impossible to do and unlikely for political reasons to happen. So that's why. But things can change. There are, where there's a will, there's a way. And if someone in the end thinks I want to explain what the Strait of Hormuz, you'll be surprised what they can come up with. And so it's in the system, and I think that means the oil price must be edging up, and that is going to be good for the Gulf states. It's going to be good for Russia. It's going to be good mainly for the BRICS countries, I think, and it's not going to be very good for the American voters, which brings us back to my obsession: is if the American people really, the ball's in their court.
Well, if we detach you from the Americans briefly and take a look at into the crystal ball, because one of those actors who you talk about who might upset the apple cart and create problems are the Houthis in North Yemen. Now, they are still talking to the Saudis, so it might be worth taking a look at 3 possible scenarios of where the Houthis might want to play out. They do want to make a deal, and they're ready, but they are ready to grab as much as they can. Now, the interesting part about this is that Mohammed bin Salman is pretty desperate to get out of Yemen, and he has given them so much rope over the last 6 months of war, and then another 6 months before, as they've negotiated a possible deal, and the Houthis just keep pulling, and he keeps giving. Where might they go? I give you 3 possible options. One could be that the Houthis want to become a major regional player, and they'll start sending their drones and they'll start acting around the region. If they do that, they would lose, I think, quite a lot, and they would make a mistake. So more likely are the 2 local options. One would be for the Houthis to leave their territory in the mountains of North Yemen, advance across the flat desert to Ma'arib and the oil fields, where they'd have the advantage of getting control of the oil and therefore some revenue, because the Houthis do not have much revenue. I mean, the people in North Yemen are relatively poor, not to say completely traumatized by the war, and they are virtually untaxable, so that the Houthis can't make much money. So that would be one thing. Or there's a third option, which is they stay local, they strengthen their grip on the people, and they build better relations with their neighbors and their allies, which would include any former enemy, because they've all been in and out of alliances over the last 20, 30 years and are quite familiar with remaking friends and restarting alliances.
Yeah.
So those 3 options, I think, are ones which need to be a very important factor in creating the final deal in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, so that Saudi Arabia can leave and create some kind of more peaceful territory.
It's one of the characteristics, I think, of these small groups, whether comparatively small or rather, and it's that their inscrutability. They like being inscrutable and incomprehensible, and nobody really knows whether they are completely deranged or they've got conventional ambitions and aspirations. So I think there's a recognition that there's more rationality in the Houthis than we previously thought. And that maybe that's reflected in the fact, as I mentioned, this laden LNG tanker is now making its way down the Red Sea. It seems to suggest that there's a bit more confidence that the Houthis aren't going to blow them out the sea. So I think we're seeing evidence the Houthis themselves are emerging slowly in the direction of being a more obviously recognizably normal political system, which I think brings us to the third option. I think not marching on Mareb, not trying to launch wars in the whole region, but actually to be recognized as being a proper grown-up country.
And that would fit their history. I mean, I may be optimistic in thinking that third option is the one to go for, but it would fit their history, where the Houthis themselves were not part of it. They come from that Hashid tribe, which has been one of the two who have influenced North Yemen for the last 100, 200, 300 years. They were the ones who helped create the Imamate in the early 1900s. They have a very long tribal memory, and the Houthis come out of that tradition. Yeah. So let's hope that that's the way it's going to go. Yeah,
well, hope, faith, what's the word, Francis? We trying on to faith more than hope. I'm more on faith than hope. I don't really have much hope that things are going to get better, but I believe that it must.
I think there's a very good chance that, well, in the end, I think the Yemen deal in particular will slowly come there. But I think Mohammed bin Salman has to recognize that he's the loser, and the Houthis are going to negotiate as tough a deal as they can.
Yeah.
So there we pause, having had a very successful round of what's been going on. Eddie, I thank you. It's been an interesting session.
Thank you, Francis.
And I say to you all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.